In this installation of our lectorium, we continue the subject that we began to discuss in our previous episode, which book of the Bible is the easiest. So today's subject, which book of the Bible is the most challenging? And so again, we will continue discussing the different genres of different books of the Bible. And so from historical and apocalyptic genre, we will traverse into the next level, legal genre. And when we talk about legal genre, of course, this is the Torah. This is the Torah. And so, as I explained in the previous lecture, the Torah, the 5 books of Moses, it has many genres. Particularly, it has narrative, historic narrative, which is very important. And the second major genre that can be found in the Torah is the legal genre. All these laws. And this is very important for a reader to distinguish what is the reader reading. Because the story of patriarchs, you need to understand the whole story before and after what happened. You know, if we want to understand and we don't understand what happened to Isaac, we need to look at what happened before with Abraham. There are sometimes very challenging texts, especially that deal with wars that we will see in books of Joshua, in books of Judges, in books of Samuel and Kings. And the best way to understand the reasons behind certain things that seem to be even very violent, we have to read what happened before, and this usually explains why things happen this way. For example, there was a very, very violent battle over the city of Ai in the book. It's described in the book of Joshua, and that is during the conquest of Canaan. And the Israelites could not take it. And of course, people read about this and say, oh, why is God sending them to kill? Well, we have to read what happened before. Because what happened before is the story of Jericho, where actually God made all these walls of the city of Jericho to collapse. And so Israelites didn't really shed any blood. But God warned Israelites that they must obey very strictly and not to take anything in the city, which is because all things that belong to the inhabitants of Jericho, they are under a special curse. And so don't touch anything, just walk through this. But there was one man who disobeyed, and he hid a nice dress. And so this was the reason why God wasn't with the Israelites when they were trying to conquer much smaller city, and they had to search and find this particular perpetrator, and there was a judgment on him, and so forth. So this is the narrative. This is how we read the narrative. We need to know what happened before. It's absolutely incorrect to pull the verse or two or even a story from a narrative and just use it outside of the context. Well, when we deal with the law, with legal text, this is totally different. Because some of these laws are really not connected with each other. And it will take us some careful study of all the laws to find similar ones and group them together. When we do this, we will see a pattern and understand. And this is how the legal text, it's a little more complicated. So then we continue into the next level of difficulty. And the next level of difficulty is homiletics. Homiletics, it's basically a preaching style. What do I mean? Well, homiletics mainly occurs in the Gospels. As I promised in the previous installation of our lectorium, I will talk about the Gospels. Gospels are also complex. Torah is complex. It has narrative, it has narrative history, it has laws, it has even several poems or songs, Song of Miriam, Song of Moses, and so forth. And it has just a genealogical list, so it has 4 different genres. But when we come to the Gospels mainly have 2 genres. One is the history or narrative, so the description of the life of Jesus. Probably the best description of the life of Jesus can be found in the Gospel of Luke. There we have some details of his birth, a little bit from his youth, and then his life is described in a sequential way until his death and resurrection. This is why the famous movie Jesus is actually scripted mainly from the Gospel of Luke, because Gospel of Luke has most story. It has story of the life of Jesus. Of course, Gospel of Mark also has stories of healings and so forth. But what we see in the Gospels, we see also that story is, or narrative, is intertwined with Jesus' speech. And there are 2 types of speeches that Jesus gives. A sermon or a parable. When we look at the Gospel of Matthew, we have 2 sermons on the mount. Yes, there are 2 sermons on 2 different mountains. One is the Sermon on the Mount in Galilee, which is recorded in Matthew chapter 5 through 7. And the other is the Sermon on the Mount of Olives. The Sermon on the Mount in Galilee deals with ethical teaching of Jesus. The Sermon on the Mount of Olives deals with eschatological teaching of Jesus. Or eschatology means it's about the last day events. So these are not the only sermons in the Gospels. Of course, when we look at the Gospel of Matthew, we see parables in chapter 13, in chapter 18, and actually on our page, shalomlc.org, we have lectures on the parables of Jesus. So parables are also very interesting. Both homily of Jesus and the parables, they heavily draw and discuss things that are issues in Judaism of the first century. That's why some people mistakenly believe that you have to start reading your Bible with the Gospels. And it is misleading, because the Gospel may be an easy read, but if we don't understand some history behind it, we may misunderstand Gospels completely. And that's why I still recommend to start with the Torah and make your way up through the Bible rather than down through the Bible. In other words, do not start reading your Bible with the Gospel, assuming that traditional Christianity, which you may be familiar with in one way or another, has everything right. The biblical history starting from Genesis actually will prepare you to the reading of the Gospels correctly. And then, of course, it is important to realize that Jesus was a Jew and that he lived among the Jews, and lots of things which he is talking about refers to either correct or incorrect Jewish traditions. And that's why it's very important to keep this in mind. And with this, I want to wish you good luck in your reading of Scriptures.